back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the Detroit Lions' newest safety, Dean Marlowe. We're going to go into his strengths, weaknesses, and what he brings to the table. So let's get it started.
I got to shout out DoseOfDion, man, because it was actually the first time I went live on YouTube. And, guys don't know, DoseOfDion, he put out a lot of good content for the Detroit Lions.
Welcome everybody to the video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, we're talking about Dean Marlowe. You guys know what time it is. Okay, you know how we do these videos. And today it's about our newest safety who signed a 1-year, $987,500 deal. No, that's his cap hit for this season. He signed a $990,000 deal. At least that's his base salary. Yeah, not a million, just a little bit less. Very similar to what Cornelder got, basically the veteran minimum, if anybody wanted to know. But he was signed to a 1-year deal, just like a lot of free agents that we have also signed this offseason. And that was kind of the last glaring position that the Detroit Lions really would have liked to fill out before the draft started, just to open up the draft a little bit more, and they have now done that with Dean Marlowe. So we're not going to talk about, his past, where he came from as much as that, like we did in the other videos. This is specifically last season, watching the film. Marlowe listed about 6'1", sometimes 6'2", about 205 pounds, so he's a pretty good size for a safety. A little bit big for a safety, actually, which is very good for him because he plays in the box a lot. That seems to be his main role, and we'll get to that in a second. Last season, statistically, in 15 games played, he played his most defensive snaps at 22%. He also played nearly half of the special team snaps, and on the 22% of the defensive snaps, in 13 targets, he allowed 9 completions. He gave up a 105.3 pass rating, 2 touchdowns. He did have 2 interceptions and nearly 16 yards for completion, while also having 22 combined tackles and 4 missed tackles. He had 1 really big missed tackle. Plus, he had a sack and a half last season. They did like to use him a little bit as a pass rusher as well. So those are the numbers. If you guys want a comparison to someone that we all know is Jaron Kearse. I would say Jaron Kearse is someone that's kind of similar just in the role that he plays. Now, Kearse is bigger. He's a little bit taller. He's a little bit, I think he was a little bit of a thicker build than what Dean Marlowe is. But in terms of how they use him, last season, we kind of used Jaron Kearse as the guy that just followed around tight ends. That was kind of the same role for Dean Marlowe with the Buffalo Bills. So trying to think of someone to put in your head, not the exact same, but similar. And we talked about it in the other videos on how good he is as a scheme fit because the Buffalo Bills ran a very similar defense to what the Saints did last season, kind of the role that he's able to play in the box, play at a free safety, line up against tight ends, all of that jazz. We talked about that in the other videos. So I want to focus on the film specifically. We're going to start breaking it down into different categories because I'm going to try to make this video a little bit more organized where I go run defense, coverage, pass rush, and athleticism. And then I'm going to give you guys a value score based on how much money we gave him. Was it good value based on our price? I'll kind of give you that just to try to keep it a little bit more interesting and kind of give you guys like a conclusion, because usually I don't give you a conclusion on these videos. So that's kind of my conclusion for now. But I'm going to try to keep this one a little bit more organized. But before we get into the film, I had a couple of observations. First off, the first observation is that when you look at Dean Marlowe's snap counts, you'll see that over 60 snaps he played in Week 8 against New England. No other game did he even come close to that. Here's what I noticed about how Buffalo used to use him. And we could use him differently, but here's how Buffalo used him. Buffalo mainly used him as a box player that would line up and basically follow around tight ends that could be a presence against the run, that could also pass rush from the box. They didn't usually use him as a deep free safety unless there were injuries. Or the other situation would have been against Miami with the last game of the season where they were absolutely just dog walking the Dolphins, and it wasn't even close. So they just put him in the game and let him play back there with the backups. That's really the only time they played him in the back end is if they had injuries, which is good because they trusted him to play that role, or if they were just putting their backups in because the game wasn't close. Aside from that, usually his role was very similar. Follow around tight ends, play in the box, help us against run, and sometimes we'll send you on a pass rush. So while his snap counts does show more at free safety, a lot of that has to do because one game he played a ton at free safety, and that's because they had injuries in Week 8 against New England, so he's played as a starter, and he played over 60 snaps. So a lot of his snaps come in that game, but for the most part, when they're hit, we're in a healthy in the back end. Micah Hyde and you have Jordan Poyer. Those are the two guys that are the top back end safeties, and he usually plays closer inside the box. So that's usually what his role was for Buffalo. But of course, in a pinch, like we talked about, he's the kind of guy that can play at that free safety position. Maybe the Lions will use him a little bit more there next season. Maybe that's where they'll get him involved. Who knows? Because he does have that part of his game. But we'll get into that. Let's dive in to this breakdown. Start off with run defense first, and I'll give you guys a grade at the end as a run defender. So what do I like from him as a run defender? Well, as a box presence, he's pretty good for a safety. Now, he's not the biggest safety you'll find. Of course, Bobby Price for us is bigger, so it does help him a lot in the box. And what do I mean by box presence? Well, sometimes when you slide your safeties into the box, if they get picked up, they're going to be erased from the play. They're going to be drug out of the play by offensive linemen, tight ends, and they're going to have no presence whatsoever. That's not really the case here with Dean Marlowe. He can kind of hold his ground a little bit. Now, he's not pancaking offensive linemen or going through them consistently, but he's also not getting pancaked. He's able to at least hold up and stay involved in the play somewhat in the box. So that's good, is that he has enough size to not be erased from the play. So his box presence is nice in that way. Also, he is slightly quicker than offensive linemen. So when you get like zone blocking schemes, he's able to kind of work his way around and get where he needs to go to get downhill to make a play. So I think his box presence is nice, and because of his size, I also think he has good length. Not looking at any numbers there, but I think his length is pretty good just from what I saw in the film. Sometimes though, as a run defender, he does lack some of that aggressiveness. He's aggressive as a tackler usually, but he does lack some of it sometimes at attack offensive lineman, which I guess makes sense because a lot of times they're really big guys. But he does lack some of that aggressiveness sometimes. Now, while he does have good size, you notice that he still does try to avoid offensive linemen at the second level. Here's one where the left tackle gets off. Maybe even more aggressive instead of like working his way back, but it kind of takes him out of the play because he tries to avoid the block there. You talk about him as a tackler, right? If you're a run defender, you got to be able to tackle. As a tackler, really nice form tackler, really good form tackler. You'll notice, especially in the box, you know, he doesn't really throw his body at people that often, but he will lay some big hits. But he's really a form tackler, breaks down, wraps up, and goes through the body. You know, tackles through the offensive player. However, here's where he's an issue as a tackler. And this is probably why they didn't play him a ton in the back end, is because when he's in open space, you better hope that if it's a one-on-one, it's not against a super shifty player. Because if it's against a shifty running back or a shifty receiver, you can have issues there. Because out in space, he's not very quick. He's not very quick in space. And you can see it. He has problems in those situations. He's at his best, in my opinion, coming downhill making plays. The offensive player has a lot of different options and different ways that they can go with the ball. That's where he can be in trouble. You know, some of those shifty players can give him problems, and we'll talk about that more in coverage. But as a run defender, when he's going downhill, when he's attacking, aggressive mindset, he's really good. And like I said, he's a very good form tackler. It doesn't miss many tackles. However, he did miss this one big tackle against New England, I think it was, where he was playing in the back end. He was kind of waiting upon it. And that's also another thing. Too often, when he was playing in the back end, he would wait on things. Now, I get it, right? You're the last line of defense, but he's at his best going downhill, it seems to me. It seems to me, as a tackler, he's at his best coming down and attacking on things, because you don't want an offensive player. You don't want him waiting on an offensive player because he's not super quick. He's not super twitchy. So you want him coming downhill and being aggressive, and I think that's why they like him more in a box, especially as a tackler. As a run defender, it's always difficult for a safety to be extremely impactful from the box. One thing I do like, though, he does seem to be disciplined, holding his edge, especially on play-action bootlegs. Now, that's a pass, but he still does hold his edge pretty well, and he's able to really set the edge on the outside like an outside linebacker should. So I would say as a run defender, honestly, you could give him a pretty strong grade of like a 6 to 7 out of 10. When you play him in a box, I think that grade's even higher. And a lot of times for safety, like I said, they can be really taken out of the plays. He's usually not. In 22 combined tackles on 22% of the defensive snaps is a lot. It is a lot. So as a run defender, arguably his best strength, I definitely like him in the box there. Then we move on to him as a pass rusher. So we're going to go here next. As a pass rusher, pretty long, but he's not very hesitant either. He's not very hesitant as a pass rusher, so he's usually just kind of getting after it. Now, he didn't really have sacks at James Madison. They must just not have sent him on blitz. If you watch him with Buffalo, they would send him a couple of times, especially from the box position. And long, I loved it because every time that he would blitz, he would get his arms up. You know, he'd get his arms straight in the air. It made it very difficult for a quarterback to see. And even if he wasn't getting there, you'll see pass deflections like that. You'll see missed passes because they can't see over his long arms. So jump up, get his arms up in the air, and they can't see. And that's something you remember when we got Jaron Kearse when we were doing a film video on him. That was something that Jaron Kearse could also do because he was just so big, it made it difficult for quarterbacks to see anything. Not to the same extent because he is only about 6'1", 6'2", but he does do a good job of making sure he makes it difficult for the quarterback to see if he can't get there. He doesn't really have any pass rush moves, which I guess is kind of expected. He's actually not super quick. I mean, he's not that quick as a pass rusher either. Because of that, sometimes really athletic offensive tackles can kind of push him out of the play. Of course, you know, if he's free, he can get back to the quarterback. Sometimes I just wish he played with a little more power as a pass rusher because you'll see him in the open field coming down, making big plays. But then other times the pass rusher, he'll kind of come in like sideways, like trying to out-finesse them, and then he'll slip and fall, and it's like, what are you doing, man? Run through that dude. Run through him. I mean, come on, take on that running back. Like, run through him. So I want him to play with a little bit more aggressiveness as a pass rusher, but I do like his awareness as a pass rusher, getting his hands up, and I think he could definitely be a pretty big threat there, definitely more than he was in college, and only being blitzed 11 times to have 1.5 sacks, and some of the impacts that you'll notice if you watch him on film for him just getting by the quarterback and getting his arms up, it's a very big factor. So I think he's above average as a pass rusher for sure, but I don't think he's I don't think he's necessarily scary at this point as a pass rusher. Then you move on to coverage. Now, coverage has really good peaks, but then he also has some pretty deep valleys as well. Okay, what do I like from him in coverage? Well, the first thing, like I said, he follows tight ends. That's kind of his role as a guy, as a player, is just follow tight ends basically around. And if the tight end doesn't go out for a route, he's trying to make a tackle. If the tight end does go out for a route, he's usually in coverage. And you'll notice from him, especially in man-to-man coverage, he is very physical as a coverage guy. And honestly, I wish he'd bring some of this as a pass rusher, because he brings it as a tackler usually, but he doesn't always bring it as a pass rusher. But in coverage, he brings it. Right off the snap, he's very aggressive at the line, press, bump and run, like he'll get after it. And there's sometimes when he'll just knock the tight end on the ground. It's like, dang, throw him completely off the play. A couple times he'll kind of check him, the linebackers will get him, and they'll throw him off the route. And within 5 yards, right, you can be very physical there. Doesn't grab, but he's just very physical, and he's very strong at that point of attack right off the release. So he's a very physical player against tight ends, which makes him valuable on offenses that are trying to get the ball out very quickly. In that free safety, that deep safety role, or just playing in a split safety role, you love it because he follows the quarterback's eyes all the time. And even honestly, when he's playing in the box and dropping, always watching the quarterback's eyes. And I think that's why he's got an opportunity to make so many plays, and he's a threat to come up with interceptions a lot of the time. And he's a lot of time in the right spot. You'll notice even on incomplete passes, he's right behind the ball. Play quarterbacks that stare things down, that's when he can eat. Now, the problem is in the NFL, there's not a lot of guys that do that, right? A lot of guys are very smart, or if they do stare down, they make a great pass, and it's very hard, to jump those. But for quarterbacks that do stare things down, Tua Tagovailoa, like he did in Week 17, that's where you can take advantage. And you saw that because he always finds himself near the football. Cam Newton always found himself near the football against some of those quarterbacks that, stared down things a little bit too long, because he follows the quarterback's eyes with ease, and he's always got his head locked into the backfield, and he's always just kind of moving with the flow. So you love that, right? Because he usually can get himself in great position. I think he really likes playing in the back end, because when you watch him in the back end, he really shoots down on things, and he comes down, he just gets clogged up in passing lanes and just makes it so the guy is not open, just gets in the way almost of timing routes for quarterbacks, because he can see the whole field and he'll come down and just kind of get in the way. Now, sometimes he does allow things behind him, but he gets in the way. I think we have a couple of good examples here. Here you go see at the safety position, just reading the quarterback's eyes, he's going to shoot down on this and just jar the ball loose. And that's him just attacking downhill from the coverage position. Here's another good one, reading the quarterback's eyes. Newton, he's on the left side. You're going to see him flash over your screen for a second. Right there he is. And then when Newton comes back, he just kind of sits away. I think I like him more in zone. Can lead to some issues in the back end. Not all the time, but sometimes it can, because sometimes he gets caught flat-footed, or sometimes he's got his head so locked in the backfield he kind of loses things behind him, and he won't be able to give help to cornerbacks like on deep routes, go routes. Sometimes he'll be a little bit late to react to that. Like we touched on, he's not extremely athletic, so he has to really be ahead of things. He has to be on top of things, right? He can't be late to get to places, and he could be a little bit late because sometimes he'll get his head stuck in the backfield and he won't get back fast enough, and he's not able to be a factor on some of those routes where you would like the safety to be back there to help out. So sometimes him watching the quarterback, looking to make the play, putting himself in position, that's good, but other times it can lead to some issues. Even though it's not all the time, it can lead to issues. And some of the better quarterbacks that do a really good job of looking off defenders, you'll see it. I mean, man, this pass, guys, watch this pass. Okay, let's give Ryan Fitzpatrick some love here. I saw this pass like, okay, Fitz, I don't think I've heard anybody talk about this pass rolling out, and you can see how he's watching Fitzpatrick's eyes, sitting over the middle here in this zone coverage. He does a great job of that. I think, that can make him very effective as a zone coverage guy. But Fitzpatrick just kind of looks at him, looks him off, and just throws it right by his head, and he's not able to be their best play. So just because he's watching the quarterback's eyes so often, he does have the tendency at times to kind of lose, where the receivers are and lose those assignments because he's so locked in the quarterback is. But because he watches the quarterback's eyes so well and he always knows where the quarterback is looking, it does allow him to get in position to make a lot of big plays or be in a spot, and he's very opportunistic in the back end. Now, when it comes to, again, being closer, man coverage, things like this, he doesn't line up against receivers. I mean, at least I didn't see it very often. Rarely ever lines up against receivers. I mean, there's a couple of occasions thrown in there, but for the most part, he's not lining against receivers. If he is, they're usually not the fastest, and they're usually not the tallest either, right? They're kind of just like a Cephas matchup. But for the most part, he's not lining against receivers man-to-man coverage. May do it in zone because he'll drop in that area, but he's not doing it man-to-man coverage because he's not very shifty. His change of direction is not very good, and he can give up cushion very quickly in a hurry. He can give up space, and you'll see tight ends do it to him. Say tight ends in this league now are very athletic. I get it. But he's not, great with the change of direction, stopping on a dime, coming off of breaks. So because of that, putting him against a receiver could be a very big issue. And that's kind of why I think that the Bills elected to stay away from that. And that's why his main matchup was against tight ends. But he's very physical at the point of attack, very physical off the line against tight ends. And what you love about him is if he's playing back, if he's playing off, he's always watching the quarterback size, but he comes down on things very hard. He shoots down on plays, and he's very aggressive. He's very aggressive at the point of attack. So he can jar balls loose. He can make some big hits. He does have a tendency to be a step late at times, and some of that is kind of shown off, and it showed a little bit more because he's not super quick. So like I said, he's got to really be on top of things. He's got to anticipate extremely well when you're not the fastest safety back there, when you don't have the best range. And sometimes you'll see that show up in film where he's just a step late. He's just a step off the play where if he was there a step sooner, you could have made a play on the football. He's just a little bit late. And instead of being able to make a play on the football, he's going back to, I just got to hit the receiver as hard as I can to try to jar the ball loose. First off, I actually really like him in zone. Man coverage, he can be limited, but he can help you against tight ends. But I really do like him in zone. I think he's had a lot of zone experience, similar to what I can expect the Lions to do in zone coverage next season. So I like him there because he's able to keep his eyes on the quarterback, which is what he does best as a coverage guy. Also, you got to know his weaknesses. You have to know what matchups you don't want to put him in because you got to just know. You understand what his weakness is. He's not super shifty, not super quick. His change direction isn't very good. So don't be lining him up against fast slots. That doesn't make any sense in man-to-man coverage. Zone, fine, not in man coverage. I actually like him in the back end. And if it wasn't for the Bills having two really good safeties, he could have played a lot more back there because that was their guy, right? He started there. And watching against the Patriots, he pretty much did really well when he took over that role. I like him in the back end because he does a great job of jumping on things. Yes, he anticipates to be slightly late, but he jumps on things. He's aggressive. He sees everything, and he's very opportunistic. He just needs to be a little better with his awareness of things getting behind him, all right? Being prepared for that because he has to know his weaknesses that, hey, if these things get behind me, I'm not going to be able to catch up to it, all right? So I can't help out a corner. So I need to make sure I'm more aware of what's behind me and what my responsibility is, just to make sure I'm not giving it to displays. But you do like his aggressiveness because I think he's the most aggressive playing from that position coming downhill. If you use him correctly and use him to what he does well, I think his grade is much higher. I think his grade is pushing a 7 out of 10. If you just talk about overall, his grade to me is more around a 5, 5.5. Okay, so it's wherever you want to put it. I'll put it at 5.5 just because we're going overall here. But if you use him to what he does well, this is a way higher grade. And I think he could actually be pretty nice in the back end. Understanding his limitations, that he's not the fastest guy and he doesn't have the best range, but it's good enough to play that position, especially in the split safety look. Tight ends, look, it's difficult sometimes to really stop them at the point of attack because they're really long, they're big, they can really just box you out. But for the most part, when I've seen him, he's pretty reliable against tight ends. So that's where you like him. And Lions last season, if you watch the Lions, they really struggled with tight ends when Kearse was not there. When Kearse was there, he helped a lot, but when Kearse was not there, Walker struggled big time. Will Harris can't even match up with him. He's just not big enough. And you got linebackers. So for the most part, it's usually a mismatch. That's probably where his biggest asset's honestly going to come defensively is what he could do against tight ends. Because look at the Lions roster right now. We really don't have them. We really don't have that guy. I would like to have Kearse back, but we really don't have that guy. I give him about, okay, he looked average to me, And again, this is based on how much he was paid. And now, I'm not comparing him to, the best safety in the league. I'm comparing him to about what he's paid. He looked a little bit average to above average. Finally, as an athlete, I think overall, athletically, he's got the size that you want, but he's not an elite athlete right now. He's not extremely quick. He doesn't have the great range. It's solid. It's similar to Jamar Johnson, like we touched on. He's pretty strong. He's not a beast, but he's pretty strong. He's pretty well-rounded. The size is great, but athletically, he's not super fast. He's just kind of average speed. Everything just kind of so-so there. So I give him around a 5 again to a 6. Closing speed is okay. It's okay closing speed, but again, if he's not really on top of things and he doesn't anticipate very quickly, he can just look a step late. And he looks a step late because he's just not super fast, which adds up to a 24 out of 40. I'd say this is a slightly above average value for the Detroit Lions. I don't think, it was the value of a Quentin Dunbar, who has that crazy upside. I don't think this was the value of Corn Elder for what he's been able to do and what he did last year for a guy that age to get him that cheap. But I do think they're slightly above average of what he can do against tight ends, and his special teams impact cannot be overlooked. So I gave him a little bit of extra credit for his special teams ability. And again, it was a very cheap contract. I don't know if I see a game changer here, but I do see a solid player that can be a nice role piece where, hey, we need someone that can help us against tight ends. We need someone that we can trust in the back end. Boom. You can trust him in a lot of different spots on the field, But, he does have a tendency to give up some plays, and he is somewhat limited. He's limited. You can't line him out like a corner. You don't want to have him one-on-one against a very shifty player. So there are limitations to his game, but for the most part, he's pretty well-rounded, and he does add a lot to your team, and he does add a pretty good amount as a rotational player. Maybe not a game changer, but can be a rotational player, and he just really hasn't proven so far that he's been able to be a game changer yet. And I've seen Quentin Dunbar prove that. So that's why he comes in slightly above average of value. But he may shock me. He may be more than that. Maybe the Lions can teach him to be a little more disciplined. Maybe they get him ahead of things. Maybe they help him with scheme, and he's able to be more impactful in the back end, and that's where they use him. Because I think he's got a lot of things that you like back there. That is Dean Marlowe. Let me know your thoughts, comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.